It had to be supported by 2 rods of at least 1 centimeter diameter, I think, and exactly 571 millimeters from each other, with this rod balancing on top of it, and then it would measure a meter. That was the closest they got to a description to measure exactly 1 meter. So they realized even this is not good enough. They then started using light. So they looked at the light waves, and they used interferometer, which is basically, it's a light source that passes through a mirror, but some of the light gets reflected, some of it passes through. The light then bounces back from both these other mirrors, and it reaches a detector. And then what they do is they move this little mirror on the right further away, and every time they make sure that the wavelengths overlap, and they count the wavelengths, because they know exactly how long each wavelength is going to be, and they say, right, you need 187 wavelengths to measure exactly a meter. So that got them closer. They used krypton initially, and then the krypton light wasn't that strong. They later used laser, which was a clearer light, and it got them even closer. Yet this didn't last that long. In 1983 they changed it again, and this is the standard that we use today. A meter is the length of the path traveled by light in a vacuum during the time interval of 1/300 millionth of a second. That is a meter. That is how we replicate it across the world. That is how we make sure that everyone uses the same standard. So you might be asking, why am I telling you all this? Which is a valid question. Here's the thing. We all know how to use the measure. How to use the ruler. It's something that most of us have never thought about before, and many others won't think about, but as long as we can apply it, we can use it effectively. The same applies to UX. Measuring UX is simple. A lot of us are scared of complicated formulas. We're scared of the amount of time it might take. There's a whole series of myths surrounding UX metrics. I think by show of hand, it shows that a lot of us haven't tried it before. There's various reasons for that. The purpose of today's talk is to show you that it's really easy to measure. It's a practical presentation. I'm going to give you the basics, a couple of tips, lots of tools. By the end of this presentation, there'd be no excuses not to measure something. So, in order to measure a user experience, we need 3 things. We need a user to be involved. That user needs to be interacting with a product or a system or anything with an interface. And the user's experience is of interest and observable or measurable. Now you might be asking, what is that object to the right? That is a automatic external defibrillator. You might see these in public settings at, in fact, there should be a couple here at Greenpoint Stadium. So if anyone goes and has a heart attack, you connect these to certain places on their chest, and it helps to regulate the heartbeat again, and ultimately saving their lives. So a UX test was ran, a usability test was ran with 4 devices, tested by 64 users, and 2 of the devices had 100% success rate, so those people survived. Problem is, the other 2 devices, only 9 out of 16 and 4 out of 16 users failed to use the device in time and save people's lives. Now that is a scary part, to think that something that you've designed, the instructions that you put on that little strip that you need to tear off and plug on someone's chest, actually caused a death. So I think most of us are in the fortunate position not to risk lives in design, but we do frustrate users if we don't design effectively. So this is still important for us. We help businesses increase revenue and decrease costs on a daily basis. Most of us improve products and decrease costs, but measuring UX justifies what we spend a lot of our time on, and ultimately measuring it proves it. So it gives us that sense of belonging, it gives us that sense of reward if we can measure and prove the value of it. So that's the importance of measuring. That's why we want to measure. Now, all the designers, there's going to be a couple of numbers that are going to be coming your way. Stats, tables, data. Bear with me, it's going to be over quick. So let's look at the data types. According to the ISO standard on the guidance on usability, Usability is the extent to which a product can be used by specified users to achieve specific goals with effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction in a specified context of use. Now, we can use UX metrics to measure that. We can measure effectiveness by looking at whether someone is able to complete a task. We can measure efficiency by looking at the amount of effort required to complete the task. And we can look at satisfaction by asking users whether they were happy with the experience while they were performing it. And as Phil pointed out, never ask them that during the testing session, because they will feel obliged to give you positive feedback. You typically leave them alone, or you let them write something without someone around, or even better, let them write it and submit it afterwards. They'll be much more likely to give you a positive feedback when you're not confronted face to face with them. So there's two approaches you can take when doing usability testing. So if you think about cooking, if you take a formative approach, it's like the chef that are picking the ingredients and deciding what you're going to make. This is when you're in a position where you can influence the design process early on. You work with the stakeholders, you understand the requirements, you're involved with the wireframe prototyping, you can make suggestions, you can persuade people, you can sell people, you can get everyone on board. That is a great opportunity to do usability testing right there and then to support your claims. But alternatively, you can also do summative testing. Now, summative testing is like testing a meal and rating it. This would be when you compare a product or test a product that's already been built to see if there's anything that can be improved, or if you're comparing your product to competitors to see how it rates. So you could either do it during the design process or afterwards. In terms of data, you're going to be working either with qualitative or quantitative data. So qualitative deals with descriptions, it can be observed but not measured. It's opinions, colors, appearance, beauty. So if we look at this oil painting downstairs, it's from Velasquez, we can say that it's got a gold frame, it smells old and musty, it's got a nice texture, you can actually see the brush strokes, and it's a masterful painting. But we can't quantify that. There's no way to get that feedback from a couple of users and get it into solid data. When we work with quantitative data, however, we work with numbers. They can be measured. It's attributes like length, height, area. So we can say this painting is 100 by 140 centimeters, the frame's a bit bigger, it weighs this much, it costs this much, it's quite expensive, and it's got the surface area. So those are the numbers, and when we look at a lot of the ROI data, this is what we're going to be working with. So a really great reference for anyone wanting to get into measuring UX. It takes you from the ground straight through. Is a book called Measuring the User Experience. It's comprehensive, it's practical, it's filled with loads of examples, Excel tips, there's downloadable Excel files, and it's a very useful guide if you want to do a specific usability test. You can flip to that chapter, you can run through the examples and get going. So that's a real useful reference to get hold of. Now, measuring metrics and usability helps us answer certain critical questions, like will users recommend the product? Is this product more efficient to use than the current one? How does the user experience this product? How does the user experience compare to the competition? What are the significant usability problems? Are improvements being made as we go through all these design iterations? As well as helping us avoid wrong assumptions. I love this quote about assumptions. It says, it's not the things we don't know that gets us in trouble, it's the things we do know that ain't so. So a lot of the times we have very strong beliefs, we've seen it 100 times, but like Phil said, or in fact like David Perel said, if you haven't watched users, you're not a user experience designer. We make too many assumptions. As my colleague Yaku said, to assume is to make an ass out of you and me. So that's Yaku right there. I stole this from one of his earlier presentations. So 4 basic types of data is used to this is sort of the groundwork for the metrics that we're going to be looking at. Nominal data, ordinal data, interval data, and ratio data. So nominal data is really just groupings. Anything that can be grouped, but they don't. One's not really better than the other. It's bananas and apples and oranges. They're all great. We have our preferences. It's like gender and eye color or the type of car you drive. We can say so many people drive that kind of car. 45 users are female, 200 have blue eyes. We can really just report back on the number of people in those groupings. That's about as much as we can do with nominal data. With ordinal data, it's groups, but they're ordered. However, the order has no significance. So if you look at the IMDb top 250 movies, you find Life is Beautiful at number 28, Lion King at number 56. That does not mean that Life is Beautiful is twice as good as Lion King. It simply means it's ranked better than it, but the intervals is not meaningful. Likewise, if you do a survey and you rate a site and you label it poor, fair, good or excellent, we can say that 40% said it was excellent, 30% good, and we can look at the distance between good and excellent, but we can't say that the distance from good and excellent is just as much as the distance from poor to fair. So it's groupings again. The interval is still not meaningful, but we can still get some stats from that. 40% rate the site is good. It's rated 28 on IMDb, but the intervals are not meaningful. Then we get interval data where the intervals or the differences are meaningful. A good example here is dates or temperatures. One thing with interval data though is there's no natural zero. So even though we have 0 degrees with temperatures, it's only a reference for ourselves because we know water freeze at 0 degrees, but still the difference between 10 and 20 degrees and minus 10 and minus 20 degrees is equal. So there's no natural zero. Another example is who's familiar with the system usability scale? A test to get a one metric that says this user had or scored 68% usability. I'll show you an example a bit later. That's something that you can measure increase or decrease in that percentage, and we can get averages and standard deviations from this. This is used a lot in the metric that we're going to be looking at. Lastly, we have ratio data, similar to interval data, except here 0 has an absolute meaning. So if we look at time or age or weight or height, the absence of that has an inherent meaning. For example, if you're doing a test and no time remains that's done, it means something, you have to stop, the test is over. So we can do stats like it's twice as fast or half as slow. Now these all form the groundwork for descriptive stats, which are going to be the outcome of these metrics. So the statistics describe the data without saying anything about the larger population, and some of the most common measures used that we'll be looking at: central tendency, variability, and confidence intervals. 3 quick slides and then we're done with the data. So looking at central tendency, on the right we have an example of 10 participants that have completed a task, and we've simply noted the task times. Now, central tendency, one of the most common ones used is the mean or the average. So we simply total all those times, we divide it by the number of items, 10 in this case, and we get the average time of 24.3 seconds. Sometimes, especially when you have a very high top extreme or a very low bottom extreme, the median might actually be more useful. So if we had one person that performed it in 3.5 minutes, it would skew the average, and in that case it might be more meaningful to use the median, which is the middle number when we sort this list from low to high. So in this case, if we sorted it, the middle two numbers would have been 16 and 18 because it's an even amount. So 17 would be the median, and even if there was one user that performed it in 3 minutes, the median would remain 17. So it requires some kind of analysis or at least input from the person measuring to say, are we going to use the mean, are we going to use the median? Measures of variability, so we can look at the range of responses that we've received. So in this case we can look at the maximum and the minimum numbers, we can deduct them from each other, we can say from the lowest to the highest there's a difference of 48 seconds. Variance is slightly more complex, we don't have to understand all of it. All that's important to know is that standard deviation is the square root of the variance, and standard deviation is in the exact same measure that you're tracking. So in this case it means that from the mean there's a deviation to the top half and the lower half of around 17.4 seconds that shows you where the natural grouping of responses were. And lastly, we'll take a quick look at confidence levels. Confidence levels are to say, sorry, we want to say with a certain amount of certainty that users from this group or from an extended group are going to perform within a certain range. So if we look at the example on the right, we've got two designs. It's checkout times that are being measured, the checkout process. You can see that design A and design B. Design B is taking slightly long on the checkout, and those little indicators show the confidence level. In this case, it was a confidence level of 95%, which means we're willing to be 5% wrong. The most common use confidence intervals are 99, 95, and 90%. In the example earlier, someone having a heart attack, you're certainly going to be working with a confidence level of 99%. You don't want that to go wrong. So that is the basic parts or ingredients that we use to get to the metrics. So we'll just take a look at a couple of metrics to give you an idea of the kind of things that we can easily track. Performance metrics, issue-based metrics, self-reported metrics, behavioral and psychological, and live data. So performance metrics, and we can spend a lot of time on each of these. I'm just going to run through these, give you a quick overview. We can measure task success, did someone complete it successfully or not. It's a binary 1 or 0. The time on task, errors that they've made, the efficiency and learnability. Did they actually use the system in a shorter space of time as they perform certain trials? So we can present some of these data in column or bar graphs. In this case, we've looked at a couple of tasks by completion rate. So you can see that high completion rates were add to cart and checkout. Users found that to be easy. However, comparing, checking status, and posting reviews don't rank up, so it's worth checking those out. You can also see the confidence levels indicated on there. Another chart we can use, line graphs. This looks at learnability of 3 designs. So people used it 4 times. And you can see the usability, the time it took to complete a certain task decrease over the 4 times they've used it or they've ran this trial as they became more and more comfortable with the design. You can also use stacked bar or column graphs. These always add up to 100%. Here we looked at simple task success, task status. So it's a simple binary 1 or 0. Some people failed, some succeeded. And if people were asking questions, you might flag them and say, right, these people had a partial success, they need a little help, and we can illustrate it in this manner. Issue-based metrics. How do we group issues by severity, by frequency? We can group them by category. We can group them by task to get certain information from the data. Here's an example of all the pages on a specific website, and we group them by number of errors. 0 errors, 1 to 2 errors, 3 to 10 errors, most common on the website, and a couple of pages, almost a quarter, with more than 25% or more than 10 errors. And lastly, second of last, self-reported metrics. So these are when we ask users for their feedback. So now, we're not just measuring pure numbers, we are asking users for their subjective input. We ask them to rate something. Was it easy? Did they find it hard? Ease of use, system usability scale, which I'll show you just now, satisfaction, did they enjoy it, would they use it again, and open-ended questions like, what would you recommend, what do you hope to see, what would you like to add, any comments on something that you've experienced while you use the system. So here's an example of a scatter plot. This was a 5-second test where users were shown a website for 5 seconds and they had to rate whether it was visually appealing to them on a scale of 1 to 4. So what's interesting to note here is if we look at the size of the largest image on the website, the bigger the image in pixels, the more visually appealing people found it. So there's a clear correlation between image size in this case and the visual appeal that people perceived. This is the system usability scale. It's a free questionnaire that anyone can use on any project. It's 10 questions. It asks a question in the positive and then a question in the negative. And it's something that you can repeat as you do design iterations to track progress, whether your system usability is increasing or decreasing as you make design changes. This is a real quick questionnaire to run after every design iteration. Simple questions like, I think that I'd like to use the system. I found it unnecessary complex. So if you rate unnecessary complex 1, you'd actually get a very positive score from that. And if you rate the positive answers positive or high, you'd get a positive. So you basically inverse the ratings from the negative question to get a percentage from the score. So ideally, if you rated all the positive questions 5 and all the negative questions 1, you'd get a score of 100%. In this case, this user got a system usability score of 62.5%. And if we track this across the iterations, we would see whether there were improvements in the design. So this is free for anyone to use. And then lastly, behavioral and psychological metrics. So we've seen basic eye tracking, and then there's 1 or 2 examples I want to show you on emotion and stress. So this picture we've seen 100 times. We look where the baby is looking, our eyes look at the baby, it then looks at the text. So this is when we're tracking eyes on web experiences, but Toby's doing these amazing glasses that also tracks your eyes as you walk through a retail environment. So they could now give data to retailers to say, right, as this user walked through aisle 1, his eyes were looking at that product first, at your second, at the top shelf, then the lower shelf, and it could actually measure eye tracking in an interactive environment. So this is going to be opening up fascinating opportunities for retailers to leverage usability data to improve product design, product placement, and actual real-world environments. There's also these Affectiva hand guards that you wear, and it measures emotion. It can't tell what kind of emotion, so you could either be experiencing extreme happiness or anxiety. You'd be sweating a little bit, and it would pick that up. And if you combine that with a little questionnaire to say what parts of the system did you enjoy, and you can map enjoyment to a certain zone, then you can say on a measure of 0 to 100%, there was extreme enjoyment here and extreme anxiety if they said this particular portion was difficult to complete, and we can see that their stress levels were super high. So now we can actually map positive and negative experiences with levels of anxiety by using some of these tools. And lastly, live website data. We all have analytics. It's easy to check click-through rates, drop-off rates, A/B testing. We should use these a lot more. It's collected all the time. We can look at design changes, take the before and after metrics, and get a percentage from that. We should be doing this a lot more often when there's a business case where the data would help us sell something to the company. So let's look at a couple of case studies. In the traditional sense, ROI is a number. It's when you take the gains less the cost over the cost. So it would be a number like we had a 3 times ROI, 9 times, 90 times ROI. A classic example was IBM stating that for every $1 invested in usability, it would return between $10 and $100. So that's between 9 and 90 ROI. Now, if we don't measure usability, we risk something. There's training and support costs, there's maintenance costs, and costs associated with fixing problems. So to fix a problem in early analysis, and this was quite old, I think it's 1988, but they said $1 to fix some problem in early analysis, $10 to fix it in design, $100 to fix it in a prototype, and $1,000 to fix it after deployment. That is how the cost increase if you leave usability for too late. Now, we don't always measure in monetary values. In many cases we do, so here's a couple of examples. In the intranet, we might look at productivity. How long does it take for a user to complete a specific task? We know what their salaries are, we know how much time they've saved, so that we can multiply time saved by the hourly cost and we can get an actual monetary value. For e-commerce sites, we already have revenue from the site, so by reducing drop-off rates, we can see the direct impact in revenue, and we could use that to get to a number again. Likewise, if it's an app, if it's a subscription-based app, a paid-for app, as we increase conversion rates, we would see the revenue go up. But other things are trickier to measure and very difficult to tie to a monetary value. If we think about customer satisfaction, now these are already paying customers. They used to be mildly happy with your product. They're now very happy with your product. They might remain loyal for longer, but it's very difficult to tie that to an actual number. We can tie it to a percentage and say we've seen a 30% increase in customer satisfaction. Likewise, with increased feature use, If it's a new feature and we want to punt it, we can see an increase, we can get a percentage. Very difficult to tie that back to money. And then lastly, we've got websites, either content websites like a news site. Now, they might want to see an increase in visitors. That'd be great. They can track that. That would be positive. But let's say Huffington Post improves their user experience and it now actually requires fewer clicks to get to the content that you want. That would mean a negative impact on page views, which might seem strange. However, it might have an increase in customer loyalty. So you always need to weigh up whether you're willing to let go of some things in exchange for others. I mean, how terrible is those websites where you read content, but it's the first 3 sentences and you have to click next 16 times to read the whole story. I hate that. Always leave that. So there they get their page views, they lose their customer loyalty, they're going to lose their visitors. They shouldn't be doing that. And then lastly, with marketing websites, very difficult to track monetary value to that. I always enjoy the saying from marketing teams saying 50% of their marketing is working, they're just not sure which 50%. So difficult to measure, but certainly worth spending time on it, even if it's a percentage that you're measuring. If you're looking to have people stay on your website for longer, measure that, see the increase, go for it, but don't try and tie a number to that. So Nielsen Group, this was the 4th edition of a report called Return on Investment for Usability, and they have gathered responses from hundreds of companies at conferences, online surveys, asking them for the amount of money that they spend on usability on average during a project life cycle. So they asked them to submit the project cost. They asked them to submit the portion of the budget that was allocated to usability, and across more than 800 entries, the average cost that those companies spent on usability was 10%. It ranged between 10 and 13%. They looked at a couple of other studies and they said a good number to be spending on a typical project would be 10%. Now, as projects increase, this doesn't increase proportionally. If you had a project that was 10 times the size, it wouldn't necessarily be 10 times the project budget. It would probably be more like 4 times the project budget that you spend on usability. So the bigger the project, the lower the overall percentage of spend you'd need to have on usability. So in the report, not all of those respondents had clear metrics that were measured and clear before and after numbers that they tracked. However, 57 projects did, and they tracked a total of 72 usability metrics. So some projects track more than one metric. So they might have tracked conversions and increased visitors, etc. So all of these little bar lines represent a metric. Even those 3, that little empty space at the bottom left, those are actually metrics that didn't show an improvement. So those were tests where they said, if we're going to go ahead with this design, we're actually going to lose money. So it wasn't implemented, and even though it didn't show a return, that was actually a good test to have done because it saved you a potential loss of income. So if we look at and another thing to mention, those lines that are trimmed at 500%, those are outliers. They go all the way up to 900% return on usability for those specific metrics. So overall, 160% increase on usability with a 10% budget of your project spent on usability. So that's a 2.5 times increase in usability based on all these measures that metrics that were measured. 109% if we exclude the outliers, and really important, only one metric. Measuring ROI is not tricky. Pick something, measure it before and after, measure it consistently, pick any one of those and track it. So here's some of the improvements. I'm going to get to a couple of case studies. Before we do that, you can double your business in one of these ways. You either need to double your visitors, or you need to double your conversion rate, or you need to double your loyalty. So either convert more customers or have them stay with you for longer. So they reckon that 2000 to 2010 was the conversion decade, and we're now moving into the loyalty decade. So now we're saying we've got our conversions up, people are not making errors when they're signing up, we've got them in, how can we keep them for longer? So we're moving from error avoidance and sign-up processes, and we're saying, right, we got them, we're now focusing on skilled user performance and keeping them happier while using the product. So Amazon's a great example where more users have bigger cost impact. They're working with volumes, small tweaks can have massive return. We've seen some of those examples. I'm going to jump to a couple of case studies. So Eurostar, increase of 26 million a year. They've redesigned the website. They did a couple of things on there. They resolved a couple of issues. For example, when you got an error, it used to say, sorry, no trains were found. Right now it says, there's not a train at that time, but why didn't you consider one of these? That increased their sales. This was an old example, but just to show how relevant UX remains, this was the website. The search area was in the middle. It should have been on the left. They did wireframes. On the initial version, they had 100 errors, 70 issues on, they resolved some of it, still had 70 issues on a wireframe prototype, and then finally went into a high fidelity prototype. Adobe example, this is a color sharing site. They wanted to increase the number of comments that people left. They increased that by 517%. It's not very visible, but previously they had a very unconventional way of displaying comments as little blocks and a little small plus sign that no one knew was meant to be adding a comment, and they changed it to a generic add a comment showing the latest comments. And what this says is, we don't need to design a new way of doing things if it's not necessary. It's often better to stick with conventional delivery. This is one of the projects we were involved in. We redesigned the Cricket South Africa website. We measured task sets, A/B testing, open-ended questions. We haven't done before and after, but just a quick example. Revised wireframes, new Cricket SA website coming hopefully sometime in December. Live stats, new team profiles, and some of the task success examples that we asked them is, what's the current score of the match in progress, who's currently playing. We could clearly see whether it's a yes or no, whether they succeeded or failed. SA is playing a test cricket test series against England in the next few days. Where's that match taking place? These were questions that we can have a binary success for, and then some open-ended questions like, what would you like to view about your players? What would you like to view about your team? We then scored those, and we looked at negative findings. We looked at the number of people that had negative findings, so the items in red required attention, and likewise for positive, where there was not enough people that experienced a positive measure, those required attention. I'll skip over the key things. In closing, we have loads and loads and loads of tools available. Here's a dump of some of the remote usability tools, offline testing tools, A/B testing tools. I've dropped it in here so you can download it. You can go there, you can grab a couple of it, take a picture if you want. There's another one. I'm going to flip over to it in 2 seconds. More tools. Nice. Click tracking, eye tracking, session recording. By the way, that eye tracking software doesn't need any fancy hardware, uses your webcam. Eye tracking software done remotely. Go use it, get the eye tracking if there's something worth measuring and you need metrics to back that up. So, keys to success, this is in closing. To help with your UX measurements, make your data come alive. It needs to tell a story. You've got the data, make it compelling, make business see the value in it. Don't wait to be asked to measure. No one's going to ask you to measure. Measure, and they will keep asking you to measure. It's going to be a valuable experience for everyone. It's less expensive than you think. We've got some of the metrics and analytics already. The rest is simple questions. Ask them before, ask them ask them afterwards, and track the increase. Plan it, know what you want to achieve from it, know that it's worthwhile tracking, benchmark your product against other products, check that the times are correlating, whether you're ranking better or worse than them. You'll know where to improve, explore your data, speak the language of the business. These metrics need to align with the business goals. Show confidence, but don't misuse metrics, and simplify your presentation. Finally, just like they installed those 16 marble stations in Paris, the people in this room, every one of us here today, need to be spending time on metrics and promoting the return of usability. It's a super strong business case for what we're doing. It really justifies the value that we add on a daily basis. Let's get some measures, let's test, let's value, let's show the business why they should be doing more usability tests. Thank you very much.